There is a list in the Bible that almost every Christian has memorized. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. 9 words, 1 verse. Galatians 5:22. These qualities appear on posters, coffee mugs, and Sunday school walls painted in cheerful colors between drawings of apples and grapes. They are everywhere, and precisely because they appear in such comfortable, familiar settings, a fatally mistaken assumption has taken root about what they actually are. Most people treat them as a checklist. The implicit belief is that the Christian life consists of acquiring these 9 qualities one by one, accumulating them like merit badges, working harder, trying longer, becoming more patient, more kind, more gentle, until enough effort has been put in to finally become the person the list seems to describe. But here is what almost nobody says plainly. Paul, the man who wrote that list, never once called them achievements. He called them fruit. That distinction is not merely semantic. Anyone who has spent even an hour in a garden understands the difference intuitively. You do not make fruit happen. You do not manufacture it through effort or will it into existence through discipline alone. Fruit is the natural, inevitable result of a tree that is rooted in the right soil, drawing from the right source, connected to the right vine. The tree does not produce fruit by trying harder. It produces fruit by being properly connected and then simply remaining there. That single insight reframes the entire conversation. The fruit of the Spirit is not fundamentally about behavior. It is about belonging. And once that shift is made, everything else changes. To properly understand the fruit of the Spirit, you must first understand the soil it was planted in, because Paul did not write Galatians 5 as an inspirational list. He wrote it as a direct response to a crisis. The churches in Galatia were being torn apart from within. After Paul had left, a group of teachers arrived insisting that faith in Jesus Christ was not enough. To truly belong to God's people, they taught, you also needed circumcision. You needed the law of Moses. You needed to perform, to achieve, to earn your standing before God through religious effort and ritual compliance. Faith alone was insufficient. Behavior, specifically the right religious behavior, was what ultimately secured your place. The effect of this pressure on the community was not what the teachers might have predicted or hoped. Rather than producing holiness, it produced something far uglier. Galatians 5:15 describes the result with brutal honesty. The people who were supposed to model divine love were biting and devouring each other, and Paul warned that if this continued, they would destroy one another entirely. This is the psychological truth that Paul grasped long before modern research confirmed it. When human beings live under the constant pressure of performance, when their worth is conditional on their behavior, when acceptance must be earned rather than received, they do not become more loving. They become more anxious, more competitive, more brittle, more cruel. The flesh, Paul's term for the ego-driven, self-protective, fear-managed self, produces a recognizable harvest. He lists it in the verses just before the fruit of the Spirit: hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissension, and factions. Importantly, these are not the sins of people who don't care. These are the sins of people who care too much about matching, and who have been told that their worth depends on their performance. The fruit of the Spirit, then, is not simply a better version of that striving. It is the end of it entirely. To understand how the fruit actually grows, one image is indispensable. Jesus gave it to his disciples on the night before his crucifixion. John 15:5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Not a little, not less, nothing. A branch does not generate fruit through effort. It does not squeeze harder, think more carefully, or try more consistently. It does one thing. It abides. It stays connected. It remains. The life, the sap, flows from the vine into the branch, and the fruit appears. Not because the branch earned it, because the branch stayed. This is the entire architecture upon which the fruit of the Spirit rests. These 9 qualities are not targets to aim at, and hit through sufficient determination. They are evidence, visible, tangible, touchable evidence that the Spirit of God is flowing through a life that has learned what it means to remain connected. Which means the question that drives growth is never, how do I become more patient? The right question is always, what is disconnecting me from the vine? Real patience, not the white-knuckled, gritted-teeth variety, but the kind that can endure without bitterness, is what naturally emerges in a person who is rooted in a peace that does not depend on how their circumstances resolve. It flows from the connection. It does not come from forcing. The branch does not produce, it receives. And what it receives, over time, becomes visible to everyone around it. Paul places love first in the list, and that is not accidental. In 1 Corinthians 13, the same author declares that without love, every other spiritual gift, every act of sacrifice, every faith capable of moving mountains amounts to nothing. Not less, nothing. But the love the Spirit produces is not the love the modern world primarily recognizes. The Greek word Paul uses is agape. This is not the love that responds to lovable things, nor the love that arrives when it feels natural, nor the love that waits for the other person to first deserve it. Agape is chosen love, willed love. It is the love that moved toward humanity not because humanity had earned it, but because love, by its very nature, moves toward. It is the orientation of the divine heart made available to human beings through the Spirit. Living agape in practice means learning to see people as more than their usefulness to you. It means choosing the action before the corresponding feeling arrives, because agape does not wait for warmth. It creates it. Regarding joy, there is a fact that should stop the reader entirely. Paul wrote the most joy-saturated letter in the entire New Testament from inside a Roman prison. Philippians, where he commands his readers to rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice, was written in chains. This means biblical joy is categorically not the same thing as happiness. Happiness is a response to circumstances. It rises when things go well and falls when they don't. It is, by definition, conditional. Joy as the fruit of the Spirit is something that operates beneath circumstances entirely. It is the settled, unshakable awareness that the deepest things are already secured, that the outcome of your life is not in the hands of your worst day, that the grave is not the final word. Paul could genuinely rejoice in prison because his joy was not stored in the prison-esque conditions. Joy is not performed. It is practiced into place, through the sustained discipline of naming what is already true rather than rehearsing what you wish were different, through training attention to return again and again to what remains constant when everything else is in flux. In Mark 4, a storm descends on the Sea of Galilee with such violence that experienced fishermen, men who had spent their lives on that water, became convinced they were going to die. Jesus was asleep. Not troubled sleep, not fitful rest, but deeply and fully asleep. Same storm, completely different interior. Philippians 4:7 describes the peace of God as something that surpasses understanding. That phrase deserves careful attention. It does not say the peace that comes once you understand your situation. It says the peace that surpasses understanding. The peace that exists even when you cannot explain it, even when the math of your circumstances does not add up, even when the storm is real and the boat is genuinely small. The preceding verse reveals how this peace is accessed. In every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. The mechanism is release, not resolution. You do not manufacture peace by analyzing your way to certainty. You release what you are carrying, and the peace that arrives is not your own. It is His, and Philippians describes it as standing guard over your mind and heart. Patience, the next fruit, is rendered in Greek as makrothumia, literally, long-suffering. Long fuse, extended capacity, slow to ignite. And almost no one notices that the biblical examples of patience never involve easy waiting. Abraham waited 20.5 years for the son he had been promised. Job sat in silence, and Ash long after the explanations stopped coming. The early church waited and waited for a return that felt increasingly distant with each passing generation. Patience in Scripture is not passive resignation. It is active endurance with dignity. the refusal to allow the delay to curdle into bitterness. It reframes the waiting not as wasted time, but as formation time, asking not why is this taking so long, but what is being built in me while I wait. In the economy of God, nothing is wasted, not even the longest silences. Kindness and goodness appear together in Paul's list, and most readers treat them as near-death synonyms. They are not. Kindness, the Greek Christos, is the quality of being genuinely useful to others. It is the orientation of a life turned outward, soft, approachable, generous in spirit. In the gospel accounts, Jesus consistently extended this quality to those the religious system had dismissed: tax collectors, lepers, women caught in public shame. He did not begin his encounters with an accounting of their failures. He began with their humanity, and the warmth of his approach made him accessible even to those who expected only condemnation. Goodness, agathison, is something stronger. It is moral integrity with edges, kindness with a backbone. Goodness can rebuke. It can confront. It can look at injustice directly and refuse to call it peace. Jesus displayed this quality when he overturned the tables in the temple. That was not a failure of patience or a momentary loss of composure. It was goodness in motion, a righteousness that could not remain silent in the face of exploitation taking place inside a house of prayer. Kindness makes people feel safe. Goodness keeps them honest. A life formed by the Spirit needs both, and each holds the other in check. Faithfulness is, by any measure, the least dramatic of the nine. It will never trend. It will not produce a viral moment or an emotional crescendo. It is built on Tuesday mornings when no one is watching, in commitments honored when honoring them is costly, in promises kept to people who will never know how much that keeping required. The Greek word is pistis, the same word translated elsewhere as faith. That overlap is significant. Faithfulness is not merely a character trait. It is the outward, visible form of an inward trust, the daily evidence that a person believes integrity matters beyond the immediate moment, that God sees what no one else notices, and that the unseen audience is ultimately the most important one. The path toward faithfulness is narrower than most expect. Start smaller than you think necessary. Be faithful in the small thing directly in front of you. Jesus was explicit about this. The one who proves faithful in little will be trusted with much. Faithfulness is not built at scale. It is built in secret, one kept word at a time. Gentleness has been one of the most persistently misread words in the Christian vocabulary. It has been confused with weakness, with passivity, with an inability to hold a position or defend a truth under pressure. That confusion is understandable in our cultural context, but it fundamentally misreads the Greek. The word is prots, and in the ancient world, it was not used to describe someone who lacked strength. It was used to describe a wild horse that had been trained, not broken, but trained. All the power, all the strength, but now channeled, controlled, directed with precision. The force is entirely intact. What has changed is its governance. Moses was described in Numbers 12.3 as the meekest man on the face of the earth. The same word, the same concept. And yet this was the man who stood before Pharaoh without flinching, who parted seas, and who carried the crushing weight of a nation through 40 years of wilderness. He was not weak. He was controlled. His strength was real, but it operated under a governance that kept it from becoming destructive. Gentleness, then, is strength that has learned exactly how much force each situation actually requires, and that consistently chooses to deploy no more than that. The practical discipline it demands is the pause before response.
Not what do I want to say, and not what does this person deserve, but what does this moment actually need from me?
Bring only that. Self-control, which Paul places last, may be the most countercultural quality on the entire list. The age we inhabit has progressively made indulgence a virtue, treating every impulse as authentic and every boundary as repressive. The unfiltered self, the self that reacts without pausing, desires without questioning, consumes without accounting for cost, is widely presented as the most honest and liberated version of personhood. The Greek word engratia means mastery from within. It is not white-knuckled suppression of desire, nor religious performance disguised as discipline. It is the inner governance of a life whose desires have been reoriented, not crushed, but redirected. Paul in 1 Corinthians 9 compares himself to an athlete who disciplines his body not to punish it, but to prevent it from becoming his master. The distinction matters enormously. Self-control is the fruit that creates the conditions for all the others to function as they were designed. Love without self-control slides into possessiveness. Joy without self-control becomes hedonism. Kindness without self-control collapses into people-pleasing. Self-control is the riverbank that gives the river its power rather than allowing it to flood in all directions and lose its force entirely. The practical wisdom here is structural. Build the fence before you need it. Make decisions about your limits not in the heat of temptation, but long before the moment of temptation arrives. The serious athlete doesn't decide whether to train when the alarm goes off at 5 in the morning. That decision was settled the night before, when no particular desire was pulling in the opposite direction. Galatians 5:23 closes the list with a phrase that is quietly defiant in its context. Against such things there is no law. Paul is pointing directly at the religious system that has been pressuring the Galatian churches. The system insisting that more rules, more rituals, and more requirements are what God's people need. And he declares that no law governs what the Spirit grows. Love cannot be legislated into existence. Joy cannot be mandated. No rule passed by any council, religious or otherwise, can produce gentleness in a human heart. These things come from somewhere the law simply cannot reach. They come from the inside, from the root, from what happens when a branch stays connected to the vine and simply receives what the vine has always been offering. This brings everything to a single, clarifying question. Not which of the 9 do I most need to work on. That framing still belongs to the performance model, the checklist, the earning. The real question is, what is keeping me from the vine? What anxiety is cutting the connection? What compulsive need to prove something to someone is consuming the energy that should be flowing into growth? What bitterness, held quietly over months or years, is slowly severing you from your own source? What performance, religious or professional or social, has become the substitute for simply abiding? The fruit is not the goal. The fruit is what happens when a person stops performing and starts abiding. When the striving to become more loving gives way to returning again and again to the one who is love itself, the fruit comes. Not because it was forced, because the branch stayed. The branch does not produce. It receives. And what it receives, over time and without announcement, becomes visible to everyone around it.